Look, I know that today's topic might be a little less on the NSFW side, so she may not be as necessary, but it feels like it still fits the mood nonetheless. So she's back here, and the very dangerous poster on the back that almost killed me once is also there. But yes, hot on the heels of the controversy that they caused with the bugs and the gem depth and Taimanin RPG ecstasy, comes another shocker from Infi-brain and Gremory, which is that the mobile game that just began service not too long ago, Taimanin Go Go, will be ending service come 2024 January. And I figured that as someone who worked in the company in the past, now would be as good a time as any to be talking about this title since, well, one, it's already over, so there isn't any vested interest in me talking about this and dragging its name through the mud, or hyping it up so that it would continue service or something. So you can treat this as something that's a bit more impartial, hopefully. And hopefully, due to the fact that I do still have contacts within the company and using my own experiences working there, I might be able to give you guys at least some level more insight as to what went on with this title at the time. Is what I'm hoping to do with this video. This is usually the part of the video where people will cut to an intro or something to transition to the next segment, but I don't really have one of those since I don't really have much money. So, and I get what some of you might be thinking, right? Like, this guy, he's making another negative video about the company. Can't you just make something positive? Why must you be such a whiny piece of shit? No, don't worry. I don't actually hate the company or something. I promise. Okay, if you want me to talk about something positive I feel about the company, hey, the team that managed Taimanin RPG, the Japanese version of the game at least, very good people. Many people in the team I do respect as people in general. Like, they were great to work with. They knew very well what they needed to do to operate a live service game. Great people all around. Action Taimanin, hey, that title, if you think about it, it was made pretty well considering the fact that they had never made a action game of any sorts in the past. Sure, the action segments may have been outsourced, but the character models that have been created for the game since then have all been created in-house. And for the most part, you can really tell both from the way that they've been creating the character models within the game, as well as the way they've been trying to keep the game afloat, that they really do understand what their user base wants, and they're trying their best to provide it in the best way that they can. And overall, it's a pretty enjoyable experience if you want a more Kumarish, like Azure Lane-ish thing. But yeah, when it comes to positive things about the company, there are positive things to say about them as well. It's just that in recent years, ever since I started this channel at least, many of the newer titles that they have released just seem to be not as up to standard as something like what even Action Taimanin was. And as someone who was working in the company at the time that both of these titles were incepted, I feel like these are titles that I can at least value add to a little more when I talk about them as well as what happened behind the scenes. That said, for those of you who do not know what Taimanin is, that's pretty base that you watched till this point in the video, I'm gonna give as short and summarized of an explanation as I can because I don't want to go too much into it like in the previous video. But that said, as with the previous time, I'm going to put a piece of text over here. We are doing it a little different this time so I don't make the same mistake I made that time. See, we're evolving and actually not backwards this time. So for those of you who are under the legal age to view anything that's considerable adult content in your country, when this text goes off the screen, you may unmute the video. But until then, if you would mute it just for this little bit of it, that would be pretty cool of you. Well, that unless you're the poor people who live in Singapore, in which case, any form of adult content is probably banned, so you're probably really repressed, but that's okay. At least you still have your right hand and your imagination. So the Taimanin IP initially started as a series of adult visual novels centered around some of the more hardcore kinks out there. In fact, it was the series that would popularize many of the stranger kinks that still persist to this day. I'm not gonna list all of them, but I'm just gonna leave you guys with one word, which is cute. That and their content tends to have a bit more of an anti-Irish leaning, which I guess that's good for Japan, considering the fact that according to data put out by DMM in 2018, it would seem that for Japan, across all genders and demographics, it would seem that anti-R was the most popular genre for doujin, so y'all need Jesus. That said, in recent years, they've been slowly moving away from the whole adult visual novel scene, starting with their own gacha game, and then moving to make more, still gacha games, but they've been slowly adding more forms of gameplay and trying to produce games that, while lewd, aren't exactly NSFW, with games such as Action Taimanin, as well as the title that we're talking about today, which arguably might be their most family-friendly title of all time. The text at the bottom of the screen should be gone by now, so for those of you who have been sitting there at the video muted the whole time, welcome back. I hope you brushed up on your lip reading skills in the meantime. It probably would have helped a lot with that segment of the video, but yeah, let's move on to the actual game itself. This title was built to be a fully family-friendly, more casual parody-ish game. And the thing with this title was that I actually sat through, and I was there in the company at least, during the first few months of its development. And when I reached out to those who were working on the title up until its release to learn more about what was going on with it, I was not expecting them to end this quickly. I was expecting them to at least let it run for a year before ending it off, just mostly to save face, to say that they have at least ran till the first anniversary, but they didn't even get to that point. I believe the game should have started in May, and it's now less than a year still, since we still have at least 5 more months till the game would have actually reached its first anniversary, so that much was quite a big shock to me. Although, when you consider what was happening within the team, I guess it wasn't too much of a surprise. Because, and we'll get into this a little later on as well, but this game really did not seem like it would be able to make back all of the money that was invested into it. Or at the very least, it wouldn't in the very near future. And for me to explain why, I'm going to need to take you guys back to the start, back to when this game was still being proposed, so that I can explain to you guys the design intent that they initially had for this title. So with this title, it initially was meant to be an Archero-ish game with like some slight levels of gameplay changes and a bigger emphasis on the story, which was meant to be a more light-hearted comedy thing set in the Taimanin universe. And generally, I feel like they actually hit the mark with the story at least. Granted, it's not like some grand scale, big 5D chess brain level of deep plot, but for something that's set out to be a more light-hearted comedy, for fans of the series, this actually did a pretty good job with that in my opinion. That said, when it came to this title, that would probably be the best thing we can say about it, because it only goes downhill from here with all the other issues that the title had. Aside from the story and art, development of the title was mostly outsourced to another company, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. This is quite a common thing that's being done within the industry, especially in smaller companies, where they may not have as much experience as they would need in order to produce a specific type of title. So when it came to this project, Gremory was largely there in a more managerial position, basically all the positions from producer to assistant director, which for those of you who didn't know, in the Japanese game industry, there's an actual hierarchy that the producer is basically the guy at the top that proposes the idea and sets the general direction, and the director is the guy below him who works to implement all of the stuff that the producer has thought up, as well as to go through with him all of the ideas to ensure that they can be implemented within the type of game that they hope to create. But yeah, for this title, the guy who worked as the producer/director was basically the same guy who worked as the director for Taimanin RPG Ecstasy. Yeah, he actually was working on both titles simultaneously at the time. Which, if you've seen my video on Ecstasy, you know that this guy is he's a little bit of a problem in the company in general. So yeah, not the best outlook as is. And with this title, it was outsourced to a completely different company as well. The company that worked on Action Taimanin did not work on any of these two titles, and basically with RPG Ecstasy, it was outsourced to a company in Shanghai, and with Taimanin Go Go, it was actually made by a company locally. That said, while the company itself, which I'm not going to name because of the fact that I don't want to make it sound like I'm dragging their name through the mud, due to the fact that I'm still working in the game industry in general, and I don't want to cause some level of problem for this specific company, because typically they tend to have very good stuff, and the teams that they have actually have worked on many other products and produced pretty fine stuff as well. But when it came to this specific title, I don't know if it was just extremely bad luck, but they were initially given a team that was very subpar. And the thing is that for some reason, when it came to working on Taimanin Go Go, there just seemed to be a lot of very weird staffing issues on that outsourcing company's side. To put it into perspective, the team that worked on this title had changed completely 4 times during the entire development cycle of the game. So within its 2 years of development, the entire team, programmers, planners, designers, everyone had been basically cycled through 4 times. Which, as you can imagine, it's not good for the development of the game, since no one really had any idea towards the end point of the development as to how the original code that was written works, and so most were very unwilling to tweak it at all because they didn't know what else would break if they actually did something like that. So for those of you who don't know, most gacha games or mobile live service games in Japan, the people who initially work on developing the title don't work in the live ops as well, so at some point a lot of it just becomes a mystery to the new people who are working with it. But that said, with most titles, it typically tends to take many years of actual live ops for that to happen. It does not actually happen during the development cycle itself. So yeah, as you can imagine, it's not a very good outlook for the development of the title, especially since they chose to push on with this code instead of remaking it sometime through the 2 years, which in a way is already kind of a mystery to me. From what I know, it took almost 1 year for a working prototype to be passed on to the team in Gremory, which for those of you with game development experience, your palm is probably pushing your face to the other end of your head at this point, because as you can imagine, it's very uncommon for a title of this scale to take this long for a working prototype to be developed for. Because really, for a company whose entire job is to receive specifications from other company and produce the game for them, to be unable to produce basically just a simple recreation of Archero with slightly different mechanics within a month, maybe 2, is already a very big red flag. And then after that, it took another 6 months for them to produce the alpha, which when you think about it, considering the fact that they took 1 year to produce the prototype, the fact that they actually managed to produce the alpha, which is basically the version of the game where all functionality has been implemented, although it might still be buggy or unoptimized, that is already quite an impressive thing altogether. And on top of that, on Gremory's side, because like I mentioned before, that director that I talked about in the previous video, he's not exactly the best person at understanding what his job is. Like with RPG Ecstasy, he was so out of it for some reason that he didn't even realize that the contract with the outsourced company in that game actually already ended, so they had to take everything in-house because he didn't renew the contract in time. With this title, he really just didn't do anything at all either. Like, he didn't even start to push the outsourced company at all for any deadlines of any sorts until 1.5 years had already passed. He whined and bitched a little bit to his colleagues, it would seem like, which was what I overheard at least, and that's about all that he did, which of course meant that all of the issues that you would typically expect to pop up with a game's development really couldn't be addressed until way too late in the game's development cycle, when it had already gone past its deadline by more than 6 months. And that meant that a lot of features that were initially meant to be in the game either had to be foregone or just went in without proper testing either, which I also heard that game balance was going really badly with the game at the start. You see, the thing with game balance is that you typically want to create content with a certain goal in mind, right? If you really want to make a game with the goal of making a 40-hour RPG, you would balance the game such that once you include the game story into it, the player can still roughly clear it within 40 hours. And with a live service game, typically you produce content with the goal of, like, you want players to reach X point at Y time. So like, let's say your game goes up to level 100 and your goal is for players to reach level 50 in the first month, then your content has to be balanced such that the players who you expect to reach that point would be able to reach it within this time frame, which is very difficult, of course, because that means that you need to do a lot of things such as understanding the psyche of the players who you are setting these goals for. Like when it comes to your casual players, how often do you expect them to play? How much do you expect them to clear? Same for your whales, same for the people who are hardcore but F2P. There's a lot of things that you need to take into account, which, alright, they just didn't have time to do it. They really just didn't seem to know best how to do their own job. Like when they initially received the feedback saying, hey, your game, it's just too easy to clear. The people who are actually properly geared are clearing it within a week. Instead of actually making the balance more entertaining or adding more gimmicky stages or ways for the players to interact with the game, they just took the HP values of all the enemies and multiplied it by multiples of its original value. And when they got the feedback that this wasn't the best way to go about it, they basically, instead of discussing with Gremory how best to go about this, they just basically receded into their hole and just spent an entire week developing a new balance, which basically just swung back in the opposite extreme. Where if initially, like, let's say they were here in terms of your enemies are too easy to kill spectrum, they just made the enemies too tanky to kill over here, and then they just basically moved over here. And they basically, instead of discussing where best to put the balance or like cutting it all in half by just starting in the middle and then going from there, they just bounced between the extremities until they found the right point in the middle, which basically meant that the reiteration process took a lot longer than it should have. Which, as a result of all of that, basically no one in Gremory actually had the time to look through all of the content that would be released past the original release point, both in terms of adding in characters that they know would draw in the attention of their actual fans, and to rebalance all of the new content that would be coming in so that it wouldn't be game-breaking upon release. Did you know that this game initially wanted to release in multiple languages on launch? It wasn't meant to be a Japan-only release? Yeah, this kinda also became a very big issue because of the fact that nothing was confirmed until way too late within the development cycle due to this entire delay, which basically already caused the cost of the game to bubble way higher than it should have. Because remember, the fact that this game took 2 years to develop means that the cost was 100% more at minimum than what it originally was supposed to be.
And even when it came to monetization, you could say that at most it was kinda shaky due to the fact that they didn't really seem to have a solid plan of how they wanted to best make back all of the money they had input into developing the title. So on the one hand, you had them running everything through ads, you had ads for continues, you could get a free gacha roll every day, ads for more stamina. Basically, most of the base systems you could interact with in one way or another through ads. Yet at the same time, when it came to the characters that you could purchase, all the characters throughout their different IPs as well as the original ones, you were able to easily acquire them through a one-time purchase, either through free gems, which most of the characters could be, gold, which is the game's free currency as well, or you had one character who could only be purchased through yen, which was Asagi. So even then, you didn't really have characters being released in a way that would bring in the huge amounts of money that a gacha game would have been able to. And while the game did have a gacha, it was mostly purely just for equipment, which the issue with it is that in this game style of gameplay, due to the fact that a large part of your character strength comes from the RNG power-ups you get during the stage, while the equipment was useful in clearing stages, they weren't exactly so powerful that you had to constantly roll for the latest weapon and chase them whenever they come out to be able to clear the latest stage, due to the fact that the game didn't really have any form of PvP rankings to force players into that kind of position where that level of optimization is required. And in general, the weapons weren't made to be too powerful in terms of their impact on a single run, due to the fact that if they did make it too strong, it would kind of invalidate the whole gameplay concept of getting power-ups and using the right power-ups to strategically build a character that was cracked up enough to clear the stage. So while it was strong, it wasn't impactful enough for your top tier whales to be willing to spend on them every single time they came out.
And what this all means is that you have two systems, right? Your character purchases and your ads, which require a huge player base in order to be profitable. Like, to put it into perspective, for Azure Lane as well, a game that largely focuses on profitability through skins as well as fixed purchases rather than the gacha, they actually were running in the red for the first year of their servers because of the fact that they just did not hit the critical mass of players required to basically break even with their title. Which, when you look at Taimanin Go Go as well as where they were on the Google Play Store, right, the number of downloads only reached like 50k plus, which basically means that they are in the bracket of somewhere between 100k and 50k, which is a very, very pale comparison compared to where Archero Lane was at the end of its first year. And on top of that, you have to understand that when it comes to ads in games, they're actually a lot less profitable in Japan as compared to many other countries. Like, the reason why many companies in Japan tend not to use ads is due to the fact that, well, like I mentioned in previous videos as well, the gacha already exists and it brings in a lot more money in a lot shorter a period of time while requiring a much smaller group of players as well. As a result, game companies never really bothered with adding ad systems into their game, and consequently companies outside of the game industry never really bothered to advertise their products through this ads as much as well, meaning that the demand and supply of such ads were very low at that period of time, and as such, even when companies wanted to implement it, you basically had to start working from the ground up to build that economy for ads in the first place. Which I can't really remember the values after 2021, since I didn't really work with a title that actually tried to implement ads in Japan since then. But if I recall from the internal documents from Google at the time, the value of ads in Japan tended to be about 1/3 the value of ads in America, meaning that if two games with the exact same DAU, showed the exact same ad to the exact same number of people within each of these regions, the company in America would have earned 3 times the amount of revenue as compared to the company within Japan. So yeah, when you take all of this into account, it really isn't a surprise that the game would have ended service, since it was really one that with its current player base was not gonna be profitable enough to cover the overly extended cost of development that had resulted from both the incompetence of the outsourced company as well as that one director within Gremory. Which, if you think that I'm going to be sitting here celebrating the fact that this incompetently made game had died, no, not really. I mean, personally for me, I would have really have loved to have seen this game made properly and actually having done well, because of the fact that I do feel that the market for ads in gaming in Japan are something that are very underdeveloped, and if you give the systems enough time to develop, they might actually find actual proper unintrusive ways to put this into games, which could actually cause the industry to slowly move away from its over-reliance on gacha, which is eventually going to be regulated upon, even not within Japan, in many other parts of the world where people are starting to have more and more of a negative impression of the system in general. But yeah, that's all I really have to say for this video. Thank you guys for watching up till this point. I hope it was entertaining at least. As you can see, the angle of the camera is also slightly different from usual. That's because I actually got a more proper camera, which, since many game companies in Japan, especially the small ones, don't actually have remote work, that also means that I can only really record videos at night or later in the afternoon on weekends as well. So the quality of videos would start to drop more and more, unless I did something like this. Hopefully it looks better. I'm still using the mic which is recording from my PC, so maybe the sound quality should at least maintain as well. That said, if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe. We'll be hopefully doing one more video on events and then the Kasuge video at the end of the month. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe. If you get to 1,000 subs, YouTube will actually start paying me, so I can slowly try to break even on the camera at least, and that means I could spend more money on props for other more meme videos in the future as well. If any of that sounds like it's to your liking, you know what to do. You'll be able to get notifications when I release the next video. That's it. I feel like this video is already taking too long, so I'll be heading off for now. Thank you all for watching once again, and thank you to Ron Yakumo for the financial support. It really does help a lot, so once again, it's really cool that you're willing to do this, especially since, like, you know, stuff like props and the camera that you're seeing now, it tends to be a little bit expensive as well. So thank you once again, and I'll be seeing you all soon, hopefully. But until then, take care and bye-bye.